This WCAT segment's going to be a bit more serious, considering that we're talking about COVID and Omicron. But just to establish a baseline of some things that we can all agree on and that I don't need to talk about more. Masks are useful and effective at reducing the spread of COVID. Even if you don't have symptoms or know you have COVID, you can still spread it because it is a asymptomatic spreader, meaning that you could have nothing wrong with you, but you still have COVID and are still spreading it. Even if you might not be harmed by COVID, you are putting others at risk if you get it, because you might spread it to other people that are more vulnerable, or you may spread it to other people who may spread it to others themselves. Additionally, if you have COVID, you are leaving yourself open to being the breeding ground for the next variant. Even if you've already gotten COVID, you can get it again, and the natural immunity from getting COVID is not as good as the immunity from vaccines due to the inconsistencies from it. Vaccines are useful and they help you deal with COVID if you get it, but it's not a complete 100% immunity. Instead, vaccines work more as like a bulletproof vest, and that if you still get shot, you got shot, but at least you had the bulletproof vest on to protect you from much damage. Also, vaccine doses, additional ones, are able to replace the loss of efficacy that they'll gradually have over time, and they add more protection in their own right. And vaccines have not been linked to any deaths or disastrous effects. Let's actually talk about COVID and Omicron. So for those that are unaware, Omicron is a new variant of COVID that was found in late November. Currently, it is sweeping the world by storm. That is because it is much easier to spread. It is currently estimated to be about 70 times more infectious than the previous variants. Omicron seems to be less severe than previous variants, but it's not known how much less severe. The common hope that people have is that it is mild enough that even though the new cases are rising a lot, that hospitalizations and deaths would stay low. That doesn't seem to be the case. Currently, Florida hospitalizations are quickly reaching their previous record, which was during the Delta wave, and then child hospitalizations have risen the most worldwide because this is the group that is the least likely to get vaccinated. Omicron is completely unprecedented in its infectivity. There's 2 recorded and proven cases so far of someone staying quarantined in one hotel room, transmitting Omicron to someone staying in a different hotel room, and the 2 never met face to face. In New Zealand, this happened when someone staying in a quarantined room was able to transmit it to someone on the other side of the hall because their doors happened to be open at the same time. In Hong Kong, a similar thing happened, that someone with Omicron was able to transfer it to someone down the hallway in their own room, and again, neither cases had any face-to-face contact. On just this Monday, 1 million new cases of Omicron were reported in the US alone. And in the time it took me to say that, this many people got Omicron, because Omicron is able to spread at about 12 people per second. Additionally, while these numbers may seem high, they're probably underrepresented because of the scarcity of COVID tests at the moment. In Tampa, last Friday, before it was even as bad and as known about as it is now, 3 people fainted in line waiting for testing at a testing center. At-home tests have now become an extremely hot commodity, and they're now very rare. An example of this can be seen in how the prices of them have risen at Walmart, Kroger, and Amazon. Additionally, few of these at-home tests are recorded to the health department, which means that these at-home tests aren't getting supplied to the people that supply the numbers and therefore aren't represented in the statistics. This high infectivity may be a result of Omicron replicating more in the upper respiratory system, which is your throat and nose, versus the previous variants that focused more in the lower respiratory system, which were your lungs. It may also be due to that Omicron has only a 3-day incubation periods. For reference, Delta had a 4.3-day incubation period, and the original COVID had a 5-day incubation period. As a result of these lower incubation periods, it means that there's a quicker turnaround time after getting an exposure. So that means that if you were to get exposed, you have less time to turn around and do all the safety provisions that you need to do. But about that, current safety procedures are no longer sufficient in stopping the spread. The previous rule of an exposure being within 6 feet for 15 plus minutes isn't accurate anymore. Things such as having a loose mask or briefly pulling down your mask to put back on now cause risks. And something so much as entering an elevator that someone else just coughed in is a risk. Omicron's effects have been major and very widespread. In the holiday seasons, there was a ton of flight cancellations. It was at first shocking to see 2,000 flights canceled in a day, but now if you look to now, there's like 5,000 or 4,000 every single day. In New York City, currently 3 subway lines are shut down due to a lack of operators to be able to handle them. Companies that previously had reopened after the surges of COVID are now advising people to stay home. Some of these include Apple and Google. Hospitals are also getting extremely overwhelmed. This is a result of there being a lot more patients and less workers to help them. The Wednesday 1 week ago, the governor of Ohio sent 1,250 National Guards to go help with the staffing shortages. The mayor of Cincinnati has also declared a state of emergency because of hospital shortages. A lot of universities and colleges across the country are now going digital for the beginning of their semester or completely pushing off the start of their spring semester. Some of these include Duke, American University, and Michigan State University.
I go to University of Connecticut, and they made our first 2 weeks online. So the plan is that I was going to leave about next week. Them making the first 2 weeks online is definitely not a good sign.
Dr. Megan Rainey, the emergency medicine professor at Brown University School of Public Health, said, quote, "What I am so worried about over the next month or so is that our economy is going to shut down, not because of policies from the federal government or from the state governments, but rather because so many of us are ill. In the next few weeks, there's going to be an unprecedented number of social disruptions," says Dr. Peter Hotez, the dean of Baylor University's National School of Tropical Medicine. James Phillips, the chief of disaster medicine at George Washington University Hospital, said that Omicron's effect is going to be, quote, "unlike anything we've ever seen, even at the peak of the prior surges of COVID." And even though now may seem bad, we're not nearly at the end of it. The predicted peak of Omicron is going to be mid to late January, aka multiple weeks from now. It's predicted that 40% of people are going to get infected by Omicron, which means that there's going to be the same amount of cases throughout the past 2 years, all in a few months. I thought that it was only fair, given, where we are, what's going on, to have a separate section for us in a way. But yeah, so today is going to be about Florida. So, before Omicron and everything goes off, Florida previously had a record of 58,000 new cases in one day, and this was at the peak of the Delta wave. Then that record was then broken on New Year's Eve, like 2 weeks ago, with a record of 76,000 new cases in one day. And then on last Tuesday, it was broken again by 194,000 new cases in one day. So for reference, the US as a whole had 886,000 new cases on Tuesday. So that means that Florida was 22% of all the cases in the US on Tuesday. So last Tuesday as well, the Surgeon General for Florida said that they would be trying to switch to a new testing system. He said that the current way of getting a COVID test is selfish, it's anti-public health, and that the state should instead shift towards high-value testing. On the other hand, infectious disease expert Dr. Aileen Marty from Florida International University said that the Surgeon General's claims were irresponsible and that people who have the virus should know that they have it and act accordingly. Additionally, Dr. Nate Hafer from the University of Massachusetts Medical School said that getting a COVID test after any exposure is a good idea, and that's because the virus can spread before symptoms show up, so infected people should be identified as soon as possible. And then just as a little side note about the Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo, he is currently in a tenured position at UF, but the faculty at UF kind of alleged that he was more rushed into the position, not gone through the proper process that they would normally go through. And Ladapo, the Surgeon General, has previously promoted unproven COVID treatments such as ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Both of these are kind of generally agreed and demonstrably proven to be harmful instead of helpful when fighting COVID. The Surgeon General, of course, has less jurisdiction than state laws and the governor. So about testing, it was recently found out that Florida had 1 million COVID tests stored and stashed, and that they had recently just let expire. Public health officials in Florida were also mocking people who were kind of leaking this information to the public. Besides that, for everyone at Buchholz, if you're a faculty member, staff member, student, teacher, aide, what have you, Buchholz is going to be our hotspot for COVID and Omicron. So back in this past August, schools returned from the summer break, and it was also coincidentally when the Delta wave was hitting, and at the time schools also had mask mandates to help fight it. But because of all that, there was mass spreading of COVID and Delta throughout the whole country, and this was where both of them hit their peak. So now we are returning from winter break to an even more infectious Omicron variant, and we currently don't have any mask mandate or that many preventative measures to help handle COVID. So the effects of this can already be seen impacting schools. I know that me personally, I always hear at the end of the day that XYZ bus is just not coming, or it's going to be 90 minutes late. But also pediatric COVID-19 hospitalizations are at an all-time high now. In Orange County, last Tuesday, 5% of the instructional staff called in sick, and then only 95 out of the 650 bus drivers came to work. Additionally, in Osceola County, 8% of the teaching staff called in sick for returning back from break. Now, of course, you may be wondering how might this be handled, so I'm going to break this up into different little categories for potential responses. So, mask mandate. This is, of course, the most recent system that we had in place to help fight COVID, but that's not really happening anymore, and I'm going to tell you the whole history as to why not. So, on July 30th, the Florida Governor Robert DeSantis issued an executive order that banned school mask mandates. He said that this executive order would be supporting the Parents' Bill of Rights, which is a part of the Florida Constitution. And DeSantis also threatened to cut funding from schools that would have their mask mandate and defy the ban. So, in response, parents across the state decided to sue the governor over the ban, and their main message was that COVID has killed more than masks have. These kinds of policies and bans on mask mandates were happening across the country. So in response, the Biden administration promised reimbursements to counties and school districts nationwide that were following CDC guidelines instead of state guidelines. On August 27th, Judge John Cooper, who is presiding over the lawsuit, said that the executive order was unconstitutional, and he said that it was actually breaking the Parents' Bill of Rights. He said that the Parents' Bill of Rights gives authority to the government to override the Parents' Bill of Rights if the action is reasonable and is also necessary to achieve state interests. Then also in Article 9, Section 4B of the Florida State Constitution, it says, the school board shall operate, control, and supervise all free public schools within the school district, which is commonly interpreted as that the school district has the most authority over handling them. Despite the ruling that said it was unconstitutional, on August 30th, the Florida Department of Education cut funds from school districts that were violating the ban on mask mandates. Then on September 10th, a Florida appeal court overturned the previous judge's rulings, declaring that the ban was fine. Then on September 23rd, the Biden administration started giving out grants to different counties and school districts that had been staying with the CDC guidelines over the state guidelines. So the Alachua County was offered a grant for $148,000. The Alachua County accepted the grant, but they did not deposit it. But the whole message of this first wave of reimbursements was meant to be a message to school districts nationwide that they can stick to the CDC guidelines and betray the state guidelines, and they would be repaid for it. Their Project SAFE is their program for this, and it goes throughout the 2021 and 2022 fiscal years. Throughout this whole battle, the only threat that the state government made towards the school districts was cutting funding. So the Biden administration's plans would make up for this. Additionally, if there is some threats of lawsuits that could come, schools can champion local authority, but more on that later. So from here, the story about mask mandates kind of divides up due to some conflicting information. So the Gainesville Sun says that a bill signed by Governor DeSantis blocked the districts from having the mask mandates, and that the bill was signed on November 16th. And additionally, this bill was used to directly oppose new Biden administration policies, some of which included that the OSHA guidelines for 100 plus employees and vaccination. WUFT, which is the UF-based radio station of NPR, added on to this story about a month later and said that the Alachua County also sent back the Biden funds after hearing that they would have their state funds returned. But in both of these articles, all the information and the accounts came from Jackie Johnson, who is kind of the public informant for the school board of Alachua County. However, these accounts kind of contradict with the email that the superintendent sent out to teachers. This came out on November 10th, so that was before the DeSantis bill, and it said that rules had changed about masks because of a new rule put in place by the Surgeon General. So, of course, this battle hasn't only been happening in Florida, it's been happening in other states in the country. In Iowa and Arizona, there were courts that blocked bans on mask mandates, and then in Texas, the mask mandate is currently in effect, but the Dallas and Richardson school districts have still kept their mask mandate despite Texas law, and they're saying that their safety policies for COVID are unrelated to the lawsuits going on about bans and mask mandates and are instead rooted in the authority of the local government. So, another potential option to handle Omicron would be remote learning. We already kind of went through a whole year of it, but it was, of course, flawed. I think most people will agree that it was harder for the kids that were online. It also divided teachers' attentions more, and it demanded a lot more work for teachers, such as one teacher was cited as saying that it required 100 hours more work. And it was also a bit unfair to teachers as they were forced to stay in person, at least for the high flex formula, and weren't allowed to be online. However, the remote learning option was good as it did decrease the spread of COVID. It did allow a lot of students to work more stress-free without having to worry about COVID, and some people were able to thrive with it. But either way, remote learning isn't a big option currently, as the state government has previously already banned it, and it's something that we couldn't do long term, but maybe short term, but maybe not. It's kind of in a gray area. So of course, the other option would be school shutdowns and just stopping school for X amount of time like we did when COVID first hit. Of course, this wouldn't be ideal, but if it gets to that point where it may be required, then it's kind of required. So this is kind of going on in Chicago currently, as 73% of the teachers have gone on strike for remote learning, and as a result, it has canceled school almost every single day last week, except for Monday, I believe. How are other school districts handling it? So there is a plethora of schools that are opting into remote learning. This includes Newark, Prince George County, which is a suburb in Washington, D.C., Jersey City, New Brunswick. There's also Patterson Public School District, which has a similar population size to us, and also Camden, Irvington, and Mount Vernon, all of which have smaller populations than Gainesville. There's also some schools that were previously remote for like the first week coming back to school, but are now going back in person and trying other systems to fight COVID. This includes Atlanta, South Orange, Maplewood, Cleveland, Clayton County, and 5 school districts in Hudson County. Then there's also some cities that are reopening their schools, but with increased testing regimens. So this includes New York City, Washington City, and Los Angeles. Then Seattle and DC have reopened their schools, but are prepared for having to shut down if it's required. There's been lots of discussions around school, outside of school, about how to handle COVID. I know that me personally, I hear talk daily about either going online or masks or shutdowns. And the emails that have been sent out about COVID, they've pretty much all been saying that they're concerned about the future and like these upcoming weeks, as well as that they're keeping an eye on it. If we also look at the graphs of COVID over time in the county, it's pretty clear that it's becoming an issue, because if you look at the first couple of months, this was in the Delta wave, it's, pretty big, but then it leveled out after a bit, and then in November and in December, but then coming now into January, it has spiked to never before seen heights. If we're looking at the graphs of quarantines in Alachua County, they're quickly picking back up, and it should also be noted that the previous highs that they were at were when it was required for students if they had an exposure, but of course now it is more optional and it's still going back up. And then if we look at the total cases of COVID at Buchholz, they're quickly rising at speeds that haven't really been seen before. I also did a survey, and out of the 40 randomly selected teachers, only 17 responded, but out of those 17, 70.6% of the teachers said masks should be required for teachers. 88.2% said that they would wear their masks still now, even if it wasn't required. And then for masks for students, 29.4% of the teachers said they think that masks should be completely optional. 23.5% said that they think the mask should be mandated except for parental opt-out forms. And then 47.1% of the teachers said that they think the mask should be completely mandated. And just some other things. When each teacher was asked how they think the school district has handled COVID, the majority said good or at least okay. When asked about how they think the state handled COVID, 2 teachers said no comment or don't care. 1 teacher said a C- and another said meh, which I think can go either way. 1 teacher said good, and then the other 12 said that they think the state has handled COVID badly. And then for the country as a whole, there was about a 50-50 split between teachers thinking that the country has handled COVID well and badly. Of course, on the other hand, the governor, Robert DeSantis, says that kids should instead stay in schools during this Omicron spike, and that, quote, they do not need to be doing any crazy mitigation, just let them be kids. So as some side notes before ending this off, just about some more general things that have popped up that are kind of relevant. There is 2 new variants that have been discovered. So one is the EQ variant, which is potentially an issue, but not super, as it was identified around the same time as Omicron, but hasn't spread nearly as much. The World Health Organization has declared the EQ variant a variant of investigation, but not a variant of concern like Delta and Omicron are. Another variant is the Deltacron variant, which is possibly a new variant found in Cyprus that shares genomes of Delta and Omicron and is like Omicron but more deadly like Delta. However, there is some debates and disagreements about whether or not this was a real variant found, about if it was just like some DNA contamination, but the doctor that has found it has stood by that it was not contamination. However, this variant is very new, and so we will have to wait to see its effect over time. For finale, Jackie Johnson said, quote, "We have to do what we think is best for the vast majority of students, employees, and families. That includes those families who feel that they have a right to send their child to an environment that is as safe as possible. The Student Code of Conduct says that us students have the rights and responsibilities to cooperate with teachers and help create a safe environment, to be treated with respect by other students, school personnel, and campus visitors, to have a safe and orderly school, and to protect yourself and your property against injury or damage attempted by another." So, how do you feel about COVID? Do you feel that you are currently protected and safe at school and that the best is being done for you? Or do you feel that there should be something more or different done in how the schools are handling it?